Okay, so here in this worksheet, these are harder to balance equations, and so you're going to need to use a strategy, but all of these problems use that same strategy. So you start by writing what you have on each side as per usual. Let me make that a little bit thinner. Alright, so I got C's, and there are 4 of them, and then H's, and there are 10, and then O's, and there are 2. And then over here on this side, make sure you always list your elements in the same order as you listed them on the other side, whether they're in that order or not. So C is 1, H is 2, and then O's, you have to add these together, and that is going to give you 3. Alright, start with everything but H's and O's. So C's are 4 over here and 1 over there, so I'm gonna have to put a 4 here. And this is going to give me 4 C's, and then it is also going to change the O's, so now there are 8 right here, plus 1 gives you 9. Alright, so then the next thing that I can balance here, I could do my H's, so there are 10 over here and 2 over here, so if I had to put a 5 right here, that will give me 10. And then as far as O's go, I have 8 here and 5 here, and so that gives me 8 plus 5, which is 13. Alright, so now I am in this situation where you can very easily recognize it because I have to balance an even and an odd. And that is impossible. Well, it's impossible to do with the normal circumstances, so I'll show you a trick that you can use. But when you have an even and an odd at the end, there's nothing I can multiply here by 2 that will give me an odd number, unless I use a decimal. So what I can do here is I can say, okay, I have to multiply something times 2 to give me 13. So the question is, what times 2 would equal 13? And this is going to cause you to use a decimal. So the answer is 6.5. So 6.5 times 2 would give you 13. So I can put a 6.5 right here, and then this will give me 13 O's on this side. And then everything's balanced. I got 4 and 4, 10 and 10, 13 and 13. So it's balanced. But that doesn't work because you can't put a decimal in as a coefficient. So the way you fix this problem is you go through and you multiply all of your coefficients times 2. And that will get rid of your weird problem here. So let's say that there was a 1 here, even though, like I said, chemists don't put the 1. So you multiply this times 2, and this gives you 2. And then this one you multiply by 2, and this gives you 13. And this one you multiply by 2, and this gives you 8. And this one you multiply by 2, and this gives you 10. Okay? So then it's balanced, and I fixed my problem. You don't have to change your numbers down here if you don't want, but what you would do is you'd have to go through and you have to multiply everything by 2. So this would be 8 over here, this would be 8 over here, and then instead of 10 of these, I would have 20. You don't have to do this, because you already balanced it before you did this. And then instead of 13, you'd now have... anyway, so you don't have to do that. But that is the way that you can balance these difficult equations, is by using a decimal in its place, and that you do when you see an odd and an even, and an odd that needs to be an even that needs to be multiplied by 2 to give you an odd, which doesn't work. So these work here on this worksheet, they all do the same thing. So let me show you one more. So here we have C and H and O. And then over here, write the same thing in the same order, C, H, O, and then you're going to count. So this C is going to be 2, this H is 6, and this O is 2. And then over here, you have a C is 1, your H is 2, and then your O, you add them together and you get 3. So start with C's, because leave H's and O's for last. So I'm going to put a 2 here. This is going to give me a 2. That's going to change my O's as well. So now I have 4 plus 2 here, which gives me 5 instead of 3. And then my H's, so I have 6 over here. So then I can put a 3 here to make sure I get that 6. and that's going to change my O's one more time. So 2 times 2 is 4, and 3 times 1 is 3, so it's 4 plus 3, and so this gives me 7 O's right here. Now I'm in that same situation I was in last time. I have an even times 2 to equal an odd, and so it doesn't work. Okay, so when you have the situation of an even and an odd, you need to put in the decimal. So the question is, what times 2 will equal 7? Okay, and so again, you're going to need to use a decimal, and so the answer would be 3.5 times 2 would give me 7. So I put a 3.5 here. And then once I've done that, now everything's balanced. So now over here I have 7. We're done balancing, but now we need to fix this decimal problem. And so again, pretend there's a 1 here, even though chemists don't write in the number 1. Multiply 1 times 2, that gives me 2. Multiply 3.5 times 2, that gives me 7. Multiply 2 times 4, that gives me, or 2 times 2, that gives me 4, and then multiply 2 times 3, that gives me 6. Make sure you multiply every single coefficient, every single one, not just this one, every single one. Every single coefficient. Super, super important. Your equation will not balance unless you multiply every single thing. What you do to one, you have to do to all of them. So if you just multiplied by this one and got 7, then that's not balanced. So make sure you multiply by every single coefficient, because then that keeps the left and the right side the same and it keeps them balanced. Alright, so then the rest of these are for you. Keep using this strategy. Keep practicing the strategy of using that decimal in place where you multiply, usually this one, the O2, in order to balance the left and the right side. Alright, so one more thing I wanted to go over, because you might come across this at some point in your life, balancing equations, and it's important to know. So I've balanced this equation. So I have H and O on this side, and I have H and I have O on this side. Okay, so H's I have 8 right here, and then O's I have 2 times 2, which is 4. And then over here I have H's, which is 4 times 2, which is 8. And then O's would be 4 times 1, which is 4. So when you look at this, you say, okay, that is balanced. 8, 8, 4, 4. But one thing you just need to glance at real quick before you decide an equation is balanced is sometimes you do what we call overbalancing. So if I look at this equation here and I look at my coefficients, I have a 4 and a 2 and a 4. And when I see that, I'm like, oh, that's a mistake. And you say, like, why is it a mistake? But it's because they're all multiples of 2. And when you can simplify across, just like when you can multiply across by 2, if you can divide across by 2, then you have overbalanced your equation. And if you go to type in 4, 2, 4, and as your answer this week, it will be marked wrong. And this may never happen to you, or this may happen to you frequently. It just depends on your strategy for how you balance, but I find that this happens frequently to some students, and sometimes it never happens to other students, and they have no idea what I'm talking about. So just so you know, if you look at your coefficients, and you look at all of them, if there was something else over here and it was 5 blah blah blah, then it's 4, 2, 4, 5, and that's not divisible by 2, and so this is not a problem. Okay? But if every single one of your coefficients in a problem is divisible by the same number, in this case they're all divisible by 2, you have to simplify. You have overbalanced. Or if it was 3, 6, 3, then they're all divisible by 3. So you need to divide. So I'll have to divide everything by 2. So this, instead of being 4, should be 2. And this divided by 2 should be 1. And this should be 2. Okay? And that's simplified. And 2, 1, 2, those are not simplifiable anymore. We can't get any smaller than 1. And so that is the number I should have as my coefficients. And again, this may be something you never run into, just depends on your balancing strategy. It's not something I run into very often, but I do find certain students, depending on their way they balance equations, this just happens to them a lot. So if you pick a bigger number, a bigger coefficient than you need to, sometimes you need to go through and simplify. But again, only if every single coefficient in the equation is divisible by the same thing. Then you can go ahead and simplify those equations, and then you'll have to, otherwise the answer you get is wrong.